Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 663rd night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the kettle drums beat the retreat, the two kings parted and returned, each to his own place, where his people gave him joy of his safety. And the Moslem said to Gharib, 'Tis not they want, O king, to prolong a fight. And he replied, O folk, I have done battle with many royalties and champions, but never saw I a harder hitter than this one. Had I chosen a draw al-Mahik upon him, I had mashed his bones and made an end of his days. But I delayed with him, thinking to take him prisoner, and give him part enjoyment in al-Islam. Thus far concerning Gharib, but as regards Raj Shah, he returned to his marquee, and sat upon his throne. When his chiefs came in to him and asking him of his adversary, he answered, By the truth of the sparkling fire, never in my life saw I like the yonder brave. But tomorrow I will take him prisoner, and lead him away dejected and abject. Then they slept till daybreak, when the battle drums beat to fight, and the swords and baldric were dight, and war cries were cried, amain what all mounted their horses of generous strain, and drew out into the field, filling every wide place and hill and plain. The first to open the door of war was the rider outrageous, and the lion rageous, King Gharib, who drave his steed between the two hosts, and wheeled and careered over the field, crying, Who is for the fray? Who is for the fight? Let no sluggard come out to me this day, nor dullard. Before he had made an end of speaking, out rushed Raj Shah, riding on an elephant as it were a vast tower, and a seat girthed with silken bands, and between the elephant's ears sat the driver, bearing in hand a hook, wherewith he goaded the beast, and directed him right and left. When the elephant drew near Gharib's horse, and the steed saw a creature it had never seen before, it took fright. Wherefore Gharib dismounted, and gave the horse to Kalan. And then he drove al-Mahik, and advanced to meet Raj Shah afoot, walking on till he faced the elephant. Now it was Raj Shah's wont, when he found himself overmatched by any brave, to mount an elephant, taking with him an implement called the lasso, which was in the shape of a net, wide at base and narrow at top, with running cord of silk passed through the rings along its edge. With this he would attack horsemen, and casting the meshes over them, draw the running noose, and drag the rider off his horse, and make him prisoner, and thus had he conquered many cavaliers. So, as Gharib came up to him, he raised his hand, and spreading the net over him, pulled him on the back of the elephant, and cried out to the beast to return to the Indian camp. But Kalajan and Kurajan had not left Gharib, and when they beheld what had befallen their lord, they laid hold of the elephant, whilst Gharib strove with the net till he rent it in sunder. Upon this, the two Marids seized Raj Shah and bound him with the cord of palm fiber. Then the two armies drove at each other, and met with a shock, like two seas crashing, or two mountains together dashing, whilst the dust rose to the confines of the sky, and blinded was every eye. The battle waxed fierce, and fell, and the blood ran in rills, nor did they cease to wage war with lunge of lance and sway of sword in lustiest ways, till the day darkened, and the night starkened, when the drums beat the retreat, and the two hosts drew asunder. Now, the Moslems were heavily entreated that day by reason of the riders of elephants and giraffes, and many of them were killed, and most of them were wounded. This was grievous to Gharib, who commanded the hurt to be medicined, and turning to his chief officers, asked them what they counselled. Answered they, O king, 'tis only the elephants and giraffes that irk us. Were we but quit of them, we should overcome the enemy. Quoth Kalajan and Kurajan, We ta'en will unsheath our swords, and fall on them, and slay the most part of them. But there came forward a man of Oman, who had been privy counsel to Jaland, and said, O king, I will be surety for the host, and thou wilt but hearken to me and follow my counsel. Gharib turned to his captains and said to them, Whatsoever this wise men say, shall ye do. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 664th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Gharib said to his captains, Whatsoever this wise man shall say to you, do. They replied, Hearing and obeying. So the Omni chose out 10 captains and asked them, How many of ye braves have ye under your hands? And they answered, 10,000 fighting men. Then he carried them into the armory and armed 5,000 of them with harquebuses and other 5,000 with crossbows, and taught them how to shoot these new weapons. Now, as soon as it was day, the Indians came to the field, armed cap a pie, with the elephants, giraffes, and champions in their van. Whereupon Gharib and his men mounted, and both hosts drew out, and the big drums beat to battle. Then the man of omen cried out to the archers and the harquebusers to shoot, and they plied the elephants and giraffes with shafts and leaden bullets, which entered the beasts' flanks, whereat they roared out, and turning upon their own ranks, trod them down with their hoofs. Presently the Moslems charged the misbelievers, and outflanked them right and left, whilst the elephants and the giraffes trampled them, and drove them into the hills and wolds, whither the Moslems followed hard upon them with the keen-edged sword, but few of the giraffes and elephants escaped. Then King Gharib and his folk returned rejoicing in their victory, and on the morrow they divided the loot and rested 5 days. After which King Gharib sat down on the throne of his kingship, and sending for his brother Ajib, said to him, O dog, why hast thou assembled the kings against us? But he who hath power over all things hath given us the victory over thee. So embrace the saving faith, and thou shalt be saved. And I will forbear to avenge my father and mother on thee, therefore, and I will make thee king again, as thou wast, placing myself under thy hand. But Ajib said, I will not leave my faith. So Gharib bade lay him in irons, and appointed 100 stalwart slaves to guard him. After which he returned to Raj Shah, and said to him, How sayest thou of the faith of all Islam? Replied he, O my lord, I will enter thy faith, for were it not a true faith and a goodly, thou hast not conquered us. Put forth thy hand, and I will testify that there is no God but the God, and that Abraham the friend is the apostle of God. At this Gharib rejoiced, and said to him, Is thy heart indeed established in the sweetness of this belief? And he answered, saying, Yes, O my lord. Then quoth Gharib, O Rajshah, wilt thou go to thy country and thy kingdom? And quoth he, O my lord, my father will put me to death, that I have left his faith. Gharib rejoined, I will go with thee, and make thee king of the country, and constrain the folk to obey thee by the help of Allah the Bountiful, the Beneficent. And Raj Shah kissed his hands and feet. Then Gharib rewarded the counselor who had caused the rout of the foe, and gave him great wealth. After which he returned to Kaylajan and Kurajan, and said to them, Hark, chiefs of the Jinn, 'tis my will that you carry me together with Raj Shah and Jarmakan and Sadan to the land of Hind. We hear and we obey, answered they. So Kurajan took up Jarmakan and Sadan, whilst Kaylajan took Gharib and Raj Shah, and made for the land of Hind. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 665th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the 2 Marids had taken up Gharib and Jarmkhan, Sadan the gull, and Raj Shah, they flew on with them from sundown to the last of the night, when they set them down on the terrace of King Tarkhan's palace at Kashmir. Now news was brought to Tarkhan by the remnants of his host of what had befallen his son, whereat he slept not, neither took delight in aught, and he was troubled with sore trouble. As he sat in his harem pondering his case, behold, Gharib and his company descended the stairs of the palace, and came in to him. When he saw his son and those who were with him, he was confused, and fear took hold of him, and because of the Marids. Then Rod Shah turned to him and said, "How long wilt thou persist in thy frowardness, O traitor and worshipper of the fire? Woe to thee! Leave worshipping the fire, and serve the magnanimous sire, creator of day and night, whom attaineth no sight." When Tarkhan heard his son's speech, he cast at him an iron club he had by him, but he missed him, and he fell upon the buttresses of the palace, and smote out 3 stones. Then cried the king, "O dog, thou hast destroyed mine army, and hast forsaken thy faith, and comest now to make me do likewise?" With this Gharib went up to him, and dealt him a cuff on the neck, which knocked him down. Whereupon the Marids bound him fast, and all the harem women fled. Then Gharib sat down on the throne of kingship, and said to Rod Shah, "Do thou justice upon thy father." So Rod Shah turned to him and said, "O persevere, old man, become one of the saved, and thou shalt be saved from the fire and the wrath of the all-powerful." But Tarkhan, he cried, "I will not die save in my own faith." When Gharib drew al-Mahik, and smote him therewith, and he fell to the earth in 2 pieces, and Allah hurried his soul to the fire, an abiding place dire. Then Gharib bade hang his body over the palace gate, and they hung 1/2 on the right hand, and the other on the left, and waited till day, when Gharib caused Rod Shah don the royal habit, and sit down on his father's throne with himself as his dexter hand, and Jarmkhan and Sadan and the Marids standing right and left. And he said to Kalajan and Kurajan, "Whoso entereth of the princes and officers, seize them and bind them, and let not a single captain escape you." And they answered, "Hearkening and obedience." Presently the officers made for the palace to do their service to the king, and the first to appear was the chief captain, who, seeing King Tarkhan's dead body cut in half, hanging on either side of the gate, was seized with terror and amazement. Then Kalajan laid hold of him by the collar, and threw him and pinioned him, after which he dragged him to the palace, and before sunrise they had bound 350 captains, and set them before Gharib, who said to them, "O folk, have you seen your king hanging at the palace gate?" Asked they, "Who hath done this deed?" And he answered, "I did it, by the help of Allah Almighty, and whoso opposeth me, I will do with him likewise." Then quoth they, "What is thy will with us?" And quoth he, "I am Gharib, king of all Iraq, he who slew your warriors, and now Rod Shah hath embraced the faith of salvation, and is become a mighty king and ruler over you. So do you become true believers, and all shall be well with you. But if ye refuse, ye shall repent it." So they pronounced the profession of the faith, and were enrolled among the people of felicity. Then said Gharib, "Are your hearts indeed established in the sweetness of the belief?" And they replied, "Yes." Whereupon he bade release them, and clad them in robes of honor, saying, "Go to your people, and expound all Islam to them. Whoso accepted the faith, spare him. But if he refuse, slay him." And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 666th night, she continued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the king Gharib said to the troops of Rod Shah, 'Go to your people and offer all Islam to them. Whoso accepted the faith, spare him. But if he refuse, slay him.' So they went out, and assembling the men under their command, explained what had taken place, and expanded all Islam to them. And they all professed, except a few, who they put to death. After which they returned and told Gharib, who blessed Allah and glorified him, saying, 'Praise be the Almighty, who hath made this thing easy to us without strife.' Then he abode in Kashmir of India 40 days, till he ordered the affairs of the country, and cast down the shrines and the temples of the fire, and built in their stead mosques and cathedrals, whilst Rod Shah made ready for him rarities and treasures beyond count, and dispatched him to all Iraq in ships. Then Gharib mounted on Kalajan's back, and Jarmkhan and Sadan on that of Kurajan, after they had taken leave of Rod Shah, and journeyed through the night till break of day, when they reached Oman's city, where their troops met and saluted them, and rejoiced in them. Then they set out for Kufa, where Gharib called for his brother Ajib, and commanded to hang him. So Sahim brought hooks of iron, and driving them into the tendons of Ajib's heels, hung him over the gate. And Gharib bade them shoot him. So they riddled him with arrows, till he was like unto a porcupine. Then Gharib entered his palace, and sitting down on the throne of his kingships, passed the day in ordering affairs of the state. At nightfall he went into his harem, where Star o' Morn came to meet him, and embraced him, and gave him joy, she and her women of his safety. He spent the day and night that night with her, and on the morrow, after he had made the Guls ablution and prayed the dawn prayer, he sat down on his throne and commanded preparation to be made for his marriage to Madia. Accordingly, they slaughtered 3,000 head of sheep, 2,000 oxen, and 1,000 he-goats, and 500 camels, and the like number of horses, besides 4,000 fowls, to a great store of geese. Never was there such a wedding in all Islam that day. Then he went in to Madia, and took her maidenhead, and abode with her 10 days, after which he committed the kingdom to his uncle Adamia, charging him to rule the lieges justly, and journeyed with his women and warriors till he came to the ships laden with treasures and rarities which Rad Shah had sent him, and divided the monies among his men who came from poor and became rich. Then he fared on till he reached the city of Babel, where he bestowed on Sahim al-Lail a robe of honor, and appointed him sultan of the city. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it became the 667th night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Gharib, after robing his brother Sahim and appointing him sultan, abode with him 10 days, after which he set out again and journeyed not stinted travel till he reached the castle of Saddam the Ghul, where they rested 5 days. Then quoth Gharib to Kalajan and Kurajan, Pass over Isbanir al-Madin to the palace of the Khosrow, and find what is come of Fakir Taj, and bring me one of the king's kinsmen, who shall acquaint me with what hath passed. Quoth they, We hear and we obey, and set out forthright for Isbanir. As they flew between heaven and earth, behold, they caught sight of a mighty army, as it were surging sea, and Kalajan said to Kurajan, Let us descend, and determine what be his host. So they alighted, and walking among the troops, found them Persians, and questioned the soldiers whoso men they were, and whither they be bound, and whereto they were made. We are en route for all Iraq, to slay Gharib and all who accompany him. When the Marids heard these words, they repaired to the pavilion of the Persian general, whose name was Rustam, and waited till the soldiers slept, when they took up Rustam, bed and all, and made for the castle where Gharib lay. They arrived there by midnight, and going to the door of the king's pavilion, cried, Permission! Which, when he heard, he sat up and said, Come in. So they entered, and sat down on the couch with Rustam asleep therein. And Gharib asked, Who be this? This be a Persian prince, whom we met coming with a great host, thinking to slay thee and thine, and we have brought him to thee, that he may tell thee what thou hast a mind to know. Fetch me 100 braves, cried Gharib. And they fetched them, whereupon he bade them, Draw your swords, and stand at the head of this Persian carle. Then they awoke him, and he opened his eyes, and finding an arch of steel over his head, shut them again, crying, What be this foul dream? But Kalajan pricked him with his sword point, and he sat up and said, Where am I? Quoth Sahim, Thou art in the presence of King Gharib, son-in-law to the king of the Persians. What is thy name, and whither goest thou? When Rustam heard Gharib's name, he bethought himself and said in his mind, Am I asleep, or am I awake? Whereupon Sahim dealt him a buffet, saying, Why dost thou not answer? And he raised his head and asked, Who brought me from my tent out of the midst of my men? Gharib answered, These 2 Marids brought thee. So he looked at Kalajan and Kurajan, and skidded in his bag trousers. Then the Marids fell upon him, baring their tusks, and brandishing their blades, and said to him, Wilt thou not rise and kiss ground before King Gharib? And he trembled at them, and was assured that he was not asleep. So he stood up and kissed the ground between the hands of Gharib, saying, The blessings of the fire be on thee, and long life be thy life, O king. Gharib cried, O dog of the Persians, fire is not worshipful, for that it is harmful, and profiteth not, save in cooking food. Asked Rustam, Who then is worshipful? And Gharib answered, Alone worship with is God, who formed thee, and fashioned thee, and created the heavens and the earth. Quoth the Ajami, What shall I say that I may become part of this Lord, and enter thy faith? And quoth Gharib, Say, There is no God but thee, God, and Abraham is the friend of God. So Rustam pronounced the profession of the faith, and was enrolled among the people of felicity. Then said he to Gharib, Know, O my lord, that thy father-in-law, King Sabur, seeketh to slay thee, and indeed he has sent me with 100,000 men, charging me to spare none of you. Gharib rejoined, Is this my reward for having delivered his daughter from death and dishonor? Allah will requite him his ill intent. But what is thy name? The Persian answered, My name is Rustam, general of Sabur. And Gharib, Thou shalt have the like rank in my army, adding, But tell me, O Rustam, how is it with Princess Fakir Taj? May thy head live, O king of the age. What was the cause of her death? Rustam replied, O my lord, no sooner hast thou left us than one of the princess women went into King Sabur and said to him, O my master, didst thou not give Gharib leave to lie with the princess of my mistress? Whereto he answered, No, by the virtue of the fire, and drawing his sword went into his daughter, and said to her, O foul baggage, why didst thou suffer yonder Badawai to sleep with thee without dower or even wedding? She replied, O my papa, 'twas thou gavest him leave to sleep with me. Then he asked, Did the fellow have thee? But she was silent, and hung down her head. Hereupon he cried out to the midwives and slave girls, saying, Pinion me this harlot's elbows behind her, and look at her privy parts. So they did as he bade them, and after inspecting her slit, said to them, O king, she hath lost her maidenhead. Whereupon he ran at her, and would have slain her, but her mother rose up, and threw himself between them, crying, O king, slay her not, lest thou be for ever dishonored, but shut her in a cell till she die. So they cast her in prison till nightfall, when he called 2 of his courtiers, and said to them, Carry her afar off, and throw her into the river Jayhan, and tell none. They did his commandment, and indeed her memory is forgotten, and the time is past. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 668th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Gharib asked news of Fakir Taj, Rustam informed him that she had been drowned in the river by her sire's command. And when Gharib heard this, the world waxed wan before his eyes, and he cried, By the virtue of Abraham the friend, I will assuredly go to the yonder dog, and overwhelm him, and lay waste his realm. Then he sent letters to Jarmakan, and to the governors of Mosul and Mayafikin, and turning to Rustam, said to him, How many men hast thou in thine army? He replied, 100,000 Persian horse. And Gharib rejoined, Take 10,000 horse, and go to thy people, and occupy them with war, and I will follow thee on thy trail. So Rustam mounted, and taking 10,000 Arab horses, made for his tribe, saying in himself, I will do a deed shall whiten my face with King Gharib. So he fared on 7 days, till there remained but half a day's journey between him and the Persian camp. When dividing his host into 4 divisions, he said to his men, Surround the Persians on all sides, and fall upon them with the sword. They rode on from eventide till midnight, when they had compassed the camp of Ajimis, who were asleep in security, and fell upon them, shouting, God is most great. Whereupon the Persians started up from sleep, and their feet slipped, and the saber went round about against them, and the all-knowing king was wroth with them. And Rustum wrought amongst them as fire in dry fuel, till by the end of the night the whole of the Persian host was slain, or wounded, or fled, and the Moslems made prize of their tents and baggage, horses, camels, and treasure chests. Then they alighted and rested in the tents of Ajib, till King Gharib came up, and seeing what Rustum had done, and how he had gained by stratagem a great and complete victory, he invested him with a robe of honor, and said to him, O Rustum, it was thou didst put the Persians to the rout, wherefore all the spoil is thine. So he kissed Gharib's hand and thanked him, and they rested till the end of the day, when they set out for King Sabur's capital. Meanwhile, the fugitives of the defeated force reached Isbanir, and went into Sabur, crying out and saying, Alas, and well away, and woe worth the day! Quoth he, What hath befallen you, and who has this mischief been smitten you? So they told him all that had passed, and said, Naught befell us except that thy general Rustum fell upon us in the darkness of the night, because he had turned Moslem, nor did Gharib come near us. When the king heard this, he cast his crown to the ground and said, There is no worth left us. Then he turned to his son, Ward Shah, and said to him, O my son, there is none for this affair save thou. Answered Ward Shah, By thy life, O my father, I will assuredly bring Gharib and his chiefs of the people in chains, and slay all who are with him. Then he numbered his armies, and found it 220,000 men. So they slept, intending to set forth on the morrow. But next morning, as they were about to march, behold, a cloud of dust arose and spread till it walled the world, and baffled the sight of the farthest seeing white. Now Sabur had mounted to farewell his son, and when he saw this mighty great dust, he let call a runner, and said to him, Go find me out the cause of this dust cloud. The scout went, and returned, saying, O my lord, Gharib and his braves are upon you. Whereupon they unloaded their bat beasts, and drew out in line of battle. When Gharib came up and saw the Persians ranged in row, he cried out to his men, Charge with the blessings of Allah. So they waved the flags, and the Arabs and Ajamis drave one another, and folk were heaped upon folk. Blood ran like water, and all souls saw death face to face. The braves advanced and pressed forward to assail, and the coward hung back and turned tail, and they ceased not from fight and fray till ended day, when the kettledrums beat the retreat, and the two hosts drew apart. Then Sabur commanded to pitch his tent hard over the city gate, and Gharib set up his pavilions in front of theirs, and every one went to his tent. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale for today, till it be morrow.